Good day all, and thank you, John, for all of you for this privilege I have to share my experience with you on a very topical issue on social epistemology today, the issue of post-truth and the crisis it creates for us in the field of philosophy, especially on epistemology. Before I take into some of the reflections I want to share with you, I will tell a short story of an experience I had with some of my students in the House of Formation where we are. There was this important office we wanted to share with our students, or an office we want a student to occupy, and probably also that will be helpful in the administration. And the formators, the lecturers, the teachers laid out standard rules and guidelines that can help them make this choice. And eventually they came up with about 2 students whom they considered to be the best in their own judgment. But the way we are looking at them, we know one was already, you can say, 90% a match to the standard we laid out for them. The other guy was not actually the wonderful guy, and we were even surprised his name came out among the final 2. Eventually, they had the election, and they elected the wrong guy. And I remember asking one of the lecturers, I think these guys made a mistake. And he said, no, they didn't make a mistake. They just chose somebody that can be managed. And then I went for lectures, and I tried to assess why the students had to take such a decision. And some of the students told me very funny things, but very interesting, that left me thinking. One of them said, we saw all the rules and guidelines you guys put out there, but you know one thing? This is a broken world. We don't need a perfect guy to fix it. So we need a guy who is somehow broken too. So we don't need a perfect person to fix an imperfect world. And the whole thing left me thinking. And in the course of the discussion, some of them, you know how students talk in the class, some of them said, oh, it's an untidy system, so we need a bad guy to fix it. Now, another story. During the COVID period, I think that was 2016, upward, COVID-19, I remember in 2020, at the peak of COVID, traveling to my village, Nigeria, and finding most of the women not observing the COVID rule. That's wearing the mask, keeping distance. And I said, you guys I felt they were ignorant of all the information going on about COVID. And I decided to take time to educate them. And after speaking to this group of women in the village, one of them stood up and said, you know, Father, we like all your instructions and the education. We agree with what you're saying. It's true, but that's according to you. The truth is what we call the truth. And all this left me thinking, what actually is the truth? In a situation where people make decisions, public decisions, be it at national level, at community level, or among schoolmates, based not on truth and facts, but based on emotions and personal feelings. That's exactly what we call post-truth. I thank Greg, who had already, scratched it at the beginning during his talk. Because in post-truth, it's not about ignorance. It's not about not knowing. It's about going beyond what you know and then making a decision not based on what you know, but on what you choose to decide on. That's the problem of post-truth. And this is where it poses a very big problem to epistemology, because I have tried to reconcile these stories with all the theories we have engaged in epistemology. It's against correspondence theory of truth. Even as, if you think it belongs to the consensus theory of truth, it still has a problem, because in consensus theory of truth, it has to be that the people are making a consensus based on how much they know to the information available to them. But in the case of post-truth, it's a case of people deciding as Lonergan would say, against insight. And I think there was also an expression he used on insight, what he called radical unintelligibility. You just know the truth, you know what is right, it's logical the much you know, but you decide to work against insight. However, that is one way I try to connect it with Lonergan's thoughts. It may not be very precise, but that's why this reflection today is a very big crisis in the study of human knowledge and the management of human knowledge, which belongs specifically to the social epistemology and philosophy. So I'm going to reflect on certain basic issues or questions that I'll be raising here. One of them is what actually constitutes a post-truth? Second, what is the psychology behind post-truth? Third, what is the history of the term and its evolution? Then I will look at its implications on epistemology, ethics, and social contract, and then the philosophical responsibility we all have as intellectuals in the face of a post-truth environment. Let me go straight to how do we come about this word post-truth? In 1992, a Serbian-American writer called Steve Tessic wrote an essay in the Nation magazine captioned "The Watergate Syndrome, a Government of Lies." In this essay, while describing the position of the American public, especially on issues like the Persian Gulf, the Iran-Contra, and the Watergate scandal, he wrote, "We, as Americans, as a free people, under a democratic setting, have freely decided that we want to live in some post-truth world." That was how he coined the word. So it was actually a word made in America. It was an American invention. So this is not made in Italy. It's completely made in an American term in social epistemology, and also has become a popular term now in anthropology. The prefix post in this coinage signifies a condition of after or beyond the truth, whereby the word post would imply not the absence, but rather the presence of truth as known, but deliberately avoided or rejected in making decisions on public or political issues. In 2004, the term resurfaced in the work of Ralph Keyes, who wrote in his work The Post-Truth Era, and argues that in a post-truth case, we do not just have truth and lies, as in conventional epistemology, but a third category of ambiguous statements that are not exactly true, but at the same time do fall short of a clear lie. This implies that truth and lies are no longer absolute, like in conventional epistemology, in a post-truth situation. According to him, they are mutated and sometimes can take various forms depending on how they satisfy a pragmatic interest. He tried to use other terms to capture the post-truth. For instance, he talked about what he said, it could also be called enhanced truth. It could also be called neo-truth, soft truth, or what he also described as truth light. By this, he was trying to describe a situation whereby you try to reduce the content of truth so that it doesn't become harsh in such a way that it is weakened. The content is weakened so that it could be palatable to the people. And then he also emphasized the fact that at this level, we no longer talk about truth value as, in a binary structure as we have in Aristotelian logic, where we have true or false. We'll just be talking about, he said, this provides what he calls a tertiary possibility, in which we make decisions and judge on public issues, not based on the traditional binary structure or trap, where you say this is true, this is false. Then, like Greg mentioned in the morning, it doesn't matter how we deny it, the world has become very influential in world politics today. He mentioned the issue of Brexit, he mentioned the issue of elections in America, and it is widespread all over the world. And as he mentioned, which is also true, that in 2016, it was actually voted the most powerful word by the Oxford dictionaries because of the influence this term, post-truth, had on both the US election and then the Brexit, where people made decisions not based on facts and statistics or even something that is logical, but based on their own concept of what is true. There are intellectual traditions or philosophy of history where we can also scan some elements of this post-truth. In Plato's Republic, for instance, Plato was very careful, warning especially the playwrights and poets who often distracted people from public decisions in Athens with a lot of fabrications and emotional writings that go contrary to the truth. And sometimes those things influence people's decision in the agora. In the 20th century writings, especially the work of George Orwell, in his work Politics and the English Language, he wrote that in this situation, we have known that politicians generally lie and make their lies sound very truthful, and this sways people in believing and deciding on public matters. Political language and truth variations, this is true of all political parties, from conservatives to anarchists, is designed to make lies sound truthful. Hannah Arendt also wrote in an article in the New Yorker, Truth and Politics, that what people call my opinion today doesn't actually fall within the category of being a lie or being true. People simply say, this is my opinion. And it doesn't really matter whether the opinion is true or false, but he maintains it, and they call it a new third option to how I look at reality. What is the psychology behind this? I have tried to make investigation to find out, and there were a lot of issues, but the central point among psychologists is that post-truth is based on emotion, because emotion is at the root of many forms of post-truth mentality, because it takes emotion to play down the role of logic and facts in making public decisions. And I stumbled into a work by, some of you may have read it, The Atomic Habits by James Clear. And he was, even though he was writing generally on sociology of, how, atomic habits can, accumulate into something more serious in what we do or what the society does. But there was an aspect of his work where he went into the psychology of public behavior. And this is what he wrote. He said, every decision is an emotional decision at some level. Every decision is an emotional decision at some level. Whatever your logical reasons are for some actions, you only feel compelled to act on them because of emotion. And he cited some psychologists of what they describe as system 1 of the operation of the mind and system 2 of the operation of the mind. And according to his explanation, at the system 1, what operates at the brain when the brain is processing information is often dominated by emotions and rapid judgments. The system 2 only intervenes, which is the level of rational analysis. And that's why he writes that feelings come first, then rationality only intervenes later. And the explanation he gave further was that why this happens is because when people are making decisions on public issues, most of what compels people to think more deeply or more critically are often issues that relate to them personally. But in most public issues, political statements, or issues that concern the public, there isn't always something that...
You're fine. I just need to do something. Go,
Okay.
Keep going.
Okay. There isn't something that actually concerns the individual personally. So people often stop at that system 1, where you have emotion and rapid judgments. But then eventually the consequences will come back to everyone at the end. Then he went further and said, what this means is that our responses often follow our emotions before a rational judgment or decision intervenes or prevails. According to Clare, our thoughts and actions are rooted in what we find attractive, not necessarily what is logical. Two people can notice the same set of facts and respond very differently because they run those facts through their unique emotional filters. This is why appealing to emotion is typically more powerful than appealing to reason. If a topic makes people feel emotionally okay, they will rarely be interested in the data. Most people believe that the reasonable response is the one that benefits them, the one that satisfies their desires. In making public decisions, people can create their own sense of correctness beyond objective truth when that aligns with their best emotional taste. People decide on public matters motivated more often by what resonates with their emotions and ideological beliefs or bias than what they know to be true or even right to do. Strong emotion is a very big impediment to right decisions. And that leads me to the discussions we are having in the morning when you talk about the object of knowledge and the object of value. When there's conflict between the object of knowledge and the object of value, where do people decide? Often the object of value, even if that value is not rooted in any truth or in any logic. That's the central argument. Strong emotional attachment to movements, persons, ideology, interest, or group can reduce one's capacity to objective evaluation of information in making judgments and decisions. Thus, group allegiance can trigger post-truth mentality. People are more likely to take positions against accurate information and facts in circumstances where they believe that professing or endorsing a particular belief, even when false, provides evidence of their loyalty or allegiance to a group. In that case, the solidarity value wields more influence over facts and reason in their judgments and decisions. Here is my epistemological interpretation also of the issue. Some people also have argued in social epistemology that the problem of post-truth is very much rooted in postmodernist philosophy. The reason is because some, like Matthew Diancona, argued he argues that post-truth phenomenon is rooted in postmodernist philosophy because most arguments in postmodernist philosophy often reject single objective truths in favor of a multitude of subjective and relative truths. A philosophy that argues against single objective truth is more likely to allow multiple truth values in which no interpretation seems to be more correct than others. Other factors associated with the formation of post-truth attitudes to issues include information explosion as we have it today, disruptive media system under a digital technology, as well as dwindling faith in institutions that represent truth-telling. Like some of the questions we shared in the morning, where even you are teaching your students and they don't believe what you are telling them because they want to create their own version of truth. I don't have all the time, but if I tell you the experience students are having with lecturers, you understand that sometimes they raise serious problems about knowledge system too. Mistrust on conventional media is another major factor. And most times, public relations agents often capitalize on the mistrust of the conventional media to create images of things that are much more visible than the real situation of things. They can twist facts to suit their purpose, amplify prejudice, and make real facts, especially where they are inconvenient, less attractive, and less welcoming. This is the problematic of the situation. The first problematic of post-truth problem is that it creates a tertiary value system when looking at the truth, in which one creates a sense of correctness, even when that is not based on truth. I try to call it an epistemic sense of correctness that is not based on objective truth, like the two stories I mentioned, where people make a decision based on someone they can manage, based on what speaks to them. And I was reading the work of Emile Durkheim, when he was trying to defend religious truth. He said, even when religious truths don't seem to be very rational in some cases or have sufficient empirical evidence, the fact that it affects the people is why religion and its influence has been there for ages and civilizations. So post-truth may not be true, it may not be logical, but it affects how people look at knowledge. Like, I try to make reflections also on Lonergan too, and I saw the distinction Lonergan made between theoretical knowledge and common sense knowledge. In his idea of theoretical knowledge, he talks about knowledge of how things they relate to themselves, like laws of gravity, laws of psychology. But in common sense, in his insight, he explains that it is about how things relate to us. So, post-truth may not be logical, but it may be commonsensical. That's part of the submission I try to find out reading the works of Lonergan. And then some people also argue also that post-truth, yes, it flies like lies, but it has also implications that are functional and pragmatic that people appreciate. So often people do not see the color of a lie in post-truth. They rather see the color of what can take them to where they are going. But then there lies also the problem with post-truth, because apart from this, what looked like, the positive dimensions of post-truth, people have also had their arguments against post-truth. Post-truth often does not have the color of clear lie, but it is rather more subtle than lies. A liar, for instance, might know that he or she is lying and may deliberately be lying to conceal the truth, but at least he or she can differentiate between truth and falsehood. But a post-truth speaker does not recognize this difference between truth and falsehood. He or she will not care about whether what he or she is saying is true. He or she remains focused on his or her opinion, even when contrary to facts and reasonable justification. The inability of the speaker of post-truth to recognize a differentiation between truth and lie is central to the epistemic crisis of the phenomenon, because it defeats the primary goal of philosophy, which is truth. The other crisis created by post-truth is also the crisis of who is the victim in a post-truth situation. If a liar is telling a lie, we have only one offender, the liar, lying to the innocent person who does not know the truth. But in a post-truth situation, both the liar and the receiver of the information are aware of what the truth is, but they make a decision to the wrong side. We don't have all the time. So let me just get to the end. Most times, the social responsibility of post-truth tantamount to what we may call illogicality. And that's why an author, Harry Frankfurt, describes post-truth in a vulgar term, what he calls is a habit of bullshit. In his 2005 publication entitled On Bullshit, Frank argues that the agent of post-truth, whom he calls the bullshitter, is worse than a liar in epistemology, because the bullshitter does not care whether his statements have any epistemological value or not. He simply remains indifferent to truth and lies while speaking to his audience. And in most cases, his audience consume the narratives under a willful ignorance that suits their sense of correctness. We leave the rest. Conclusion. My position is this. Post-truth is a form of falsehood in responding to information on reality. And like every other form of falsehood, it can collapse every social contract and truth credit of a society. It scorns empirical verity and sincerity needed to build faith in what people see as true. It ignores what even science and general studies can justify with their instrument as true and real. It endangers the epistemic and moral meaning among people in society and threatens honesty in which community and education are possible. This is why it constitutes a big crisis to how we know and what we know in our world today. This, of course, affects how we make decisions on public issues. In our world today, where people choose fabrications to facts, we cannot deny that our world lives with post-truth syndrome. And the crisis this creates for philosophers and sincere scholars is the responsibility to be more authentic in information management And I tried also to leverage on Lonergan. I don't have all the time for elaboration, whereby if we are more attentive, more intelligent, more rational, and more responsible making decisions, we can avoid the crisis and dangers of post-truths. Thank you.
Questions from you? Do you want to?
Okay. Greg?
Sure, yeah, thank you. This follows, or dialogue's really nicely with mine, so it gives me the chance to ask two questions. I'll just start with one that I didn't get to pursue, but that I think were also raised in yours. The first has to do with the way that, whether or not you think, using some of Lonergan's terms, there's a way that the sort of post-truth reaction is itself a reaction to what Lonergan calls alienated subjectivity. That, especially if we think about Brexit and the sort of far-right move, not just in the United States, but across the world, at least the description that people give of their reasoning is precisely the sort of voluntarism, right? A freedom to choose against what I'm being told by others is in my self-interest, and may in fact be in my self-interest, right? That's the kicker. But precisely the sort of, the mode of sort of paternalism or condescension that sort of tells people what's in their best interest instead of inviting them into a kind of
reality.
Yeah. And I don't know how to solve that, right? Because it could in fact be the case that what they're being told is in their self-interest is in fact in their self-interest, and they do real harm voting against their self-interest. And yet at the same time, there's something more here about what Lonergan calls alienated subjectivity, right? People who sort of processes for arriving at shared judgments about the common good are being sort of like, on the one hand, there are obstacles being thrown up by just the culture that we live in, and on the other hand, the solution to that is to short-circuit their own agency and sort of give them a platform that they're meant to swallow whole, and that sort of further sort of alienates them from their own, processes of discernment and judgment. So I don't know if you think there's something there that
Yeah, I think
there's no way to justify this, but it is to say there's a sort of a kind of cultural context in which there's kind of more going on here too.
Yeah, I think you're right, Greg, and thank you for that observation. But I think in line with what Lonergan would think is a way of people actually like fighting against themselves, alienating yourself for the best for yourself. And I would think also is a gradual degeneration against even common good, understanding of common good. Because one of the arguments in the elaborate version of this work I tried to make was that the problem with post-truth is that people think that when they take such decisions that they are not victims or that they don't get affected by it. But in the long run, when a kind of spoil the well, every person takes the dirty water. That's the point. And we see some of the positions politicians take, and we support them, but in the end, it gets to every person's doorstep. But because people have this short memory, or people don't have this profound sense of implications of what they are doing. I remember during an election in Nigeria, I was speaking to one of my relations working in one agency, and she was supporting one politician who happens to be a demagogue. And I just asked her a question that startled her. I said, do you realize that if you vote for this guy, you lose your job? She said, how? Maybe Joseph knows the clean team in the state. And this guy is against the clean team, an environmental group that have been working on the city. I said, he's against this position, but you listen to other versions of his story, but are not paying attention to the deeper facts behind what he said. For the first time, she said, I think you are right. I'll lose my job if he wins. But meanwhile, she has voted for the person. But because she was carried away by emotion, but she couldn't ascend to the second level of thinking. So the system, she stopped at the system one of brain processing of information. She couldn't climb to the second, and she didn't know she was going to lose her job by voting for the man. Anyway, luckily, he didn't win. Her job was saved. Okay, I think Tim first.
This is just quick. I like the way that you're invoking Frankfurt's work here. This is more a suggestion than a comment. There is an incentive for bullshitting, and it's an economic incentive. And I'm thinking of it from a different angle from the one, Greg, that you're invoking. I'm thinking of the social media universe, in which the objective is clicks, in which the objective is visibility, so you say provocative things, you know it's wrong. You absolutely have no investment in the truth whatsoever. But that becomes an economic engine. So it's not just that it's I almost want to say that it's post-truth on steroids. It's almost like another sort of running up the flagpole. Again, there's an incentivizing, and it can be done, I think, politically. But I'm just thinking. I have a particular example of mine I won't bore you with, but. I guess if there's a question here, it's if that's what we're dealing with, then I mean, it's similar to the question I asked Greg. I mean, what's the way out? I mean, if there's incentivized bullshit.
Yeah, I think part of the problem why the post-truth is very strong in controlling how people think is that, like you mentioned, it offers something that is more visible. So the pragmatic value it offers makes more sense than the epistemic value it may not be offering.
Right. There's
so it's like the argument between idealism and realism. An idealist projects the best thing, but the realist will tell you the best thing cannot work. So we work with what can work. So that's the pragmatic or instrumentalist value. I'll give you an instance in my country, Nigeria. We have a very bad guy who came out for presidency. And we have another good guy whom everyone knows. When he talks, you listen to him, he's like well-educated, well-exposed. But he lost to the bad guy. And people were asking questions. And you will meet some political analysts, they'll tell you, yes, the bad guy is the bad guy, but he understands how things work here. He's more pragmatic than the idealist. Yeah. So how do you reconcile the idealism and the realism? So and this is the role of the scholars, the philosophers, in a world where we are drifting off because of realism. How do we bring the ideal standard? Otherwise, the society is going to break down. Yeah. So that's my opinion about it. Hi, Andrew.
Thanks so much. I'm going to rely on you to help me get clear on something because I'm not. I want to be shown. If you could describe me, I'm not yet convinced this is new. In other words, I think of two things. One, the second my own, and first I'm borrowing from Huygens Fink, who Lonergan cites. He was an assistant of Husserl's, but a thinker in his own right, first rate. And in a seminar, Fink was giving this account of the birth of philosophy and truth and logic through Aristotle and formal logic, etc. You know the spiel. And the student sort of asked, well, why didn't we just everyone agree on this logic? And Fink replies, and it seems incongruous, but Fink says, they killed Socrates. But then the second thing in mind, I just couldn't help but think, what is truth? Post-truth, we're there. We've been there since the fall, right? I just don't see this as new. And the idea that postmodern philosophy has given birth to something else. I'm not saying that there's not new context, but I just think to sort of reduce it is to sort of, in other words, to reduce it to a historical moment is to participate in post-truth. There's something far more profound going on, and that logic is not going to respond to.
Yeah, I get the point you're trying to make. The point is that the guy that coined this term, post-truth, certainly is not that he just gave us the terminology. But it doesn't mean that we don't have shadows of such existing. That's why I had to make reference to philosophers that actually predated him. That's why I had to make reference to Plato, had to make reference to George Orwell, whose work came prior to his description. But he was actually the one that coined this term. But it's not like, public manipulation has not been there. Like you mentioned, from the time of Socrates, it has always been there. Even some of the philosophers, like Aristotle, had to run away because they said so that Athens will not commit the same sin against philosophy. So even at that time, the Athenian society was often swayed by sentiments and emotions that they make decisions after the truth.
But there seems to be a residual in your account where, as if there was a time when people had
Just become this way.
good, people had.
No, what is different in our world is that it's becoming more intense.
Is it though? I mean, we went through two world wars, constant revolution. I'm less and less convinced that it's. I mean, what's new is the sort of, as Tim is suggesting, or I hear him suggesting, the mass media is different.
Yeah, I think the mass media.
Don't you think, I mean, if I could just jump in, I also think there's a re-reckoning. I don't disagree with the historical process at all, but I think on the other side of the Enlightenment and the scientific revolution, and the sort of at least a dominant strand of theoretical inquiry that seems to suggest a sort of, unilinear progress in the factual unfolding of the world, that precisely on the other side of that, which would not have surprised Socrates or Luther, right? That we could have this sort of return and begin telling a different story about ourselves, and that wouldn't have sort of ushered in sort of progress across the board. Accounts for there's a sort of newness in the sense of a sort of reconfronting this in a new context. Yeah, I've been thinking Machiavelli is a kind of effectual truth.
Exactly, sure.
Yeah,
Right? You're right, yeah.
The truth that you can produce is the truth that matters.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and Andrew, I think to like,
Hi, Nick.
not just the,
Okay.
oh, sorry, man, I didn't see you. I was trying to jump in, I'm like, what was I gonna say? Oh, that I do think that some of this is primed by the intersection of some real consolidation in methodical controls on meaning in the 20th century with mass media technology that created the possibility for a fleeting moment of a monoculture, and coupled to American imperialism that spread that monoculture globally. And so I think you have there is I do think there's a kind of excellence in the control of meaning that was achieved in certain elite circles in the 20th century that obviously stands on the shoulders of giants. But I think when you pair that to the mass media technology that suggests the possibility of some kind of veridical monoculture.
Sure.
So whatever Walter Cronkite tells me on the evening news, those are the facts. I do think it primes us for a kind of romantic response to the resurgence of what is probably, I agree with you, I think more the baseline in human history of just people engaging in motivated reasoning and all the other stuff. I don't know, I mean, does that fill in some of the gaps on sort of why there's this tendency to think in terms of some lost golden age?
Yeah, maybe. I think about it more. I think it's the control meaning point is interesting, but I guess something that's unique about our age is that we can hear from the peasants.
Yeah.
Like we have thousands of years of people we just didn't hear from.
Yes.
And so the idea of a monoculture, we just don't have anything surviving. I mean, you sort of get what, the 16th century of Flemish painters finally painting peasant life?
Sure.
And so it is complicated, I know.
Yeah, I think the only thing I could also add, is not that human beings have not been acting that way, but I may try to make a comparison with the term like globalization today. The world has been communicating at global level, but it was only in the recent century that relationship was actually, if you want to use the word, given a term that actually captures the interaction. So I think post-truth could have been there. The intellectual history of the world has always shown people acting that way. But in the recent time, the term post-truth has gained currency because it seems to capture a wider spread of the oppression. Just like globalization today captures a wider spread of the oppression, even though prior to the invention of the term or the coinage of the term, just in the late 40s, societies and nations have been engaging in globalization events. Of course, there were terms that were used for that prior to globalization, like mondialization and the rest of them. But today, when people talk of globalization, the meaning becomes more assertive in the mind and what is going on. So I think also post-truth has been there, like smoldering fire. But in our age now, it seems to be burning. And the term that captures that flaming is just the post-truth, because it's a question of people skipping the truth, Not because people have not been skipping the truth, but with deeper dynamics, not based on ignorance or lack of information, but well-informed, but deliberately avoided. Anyway, that's my little contribution to that. That's why I tried to draw the analogy between globalization and post-truth.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Yeah, Nick?
Sorry, guys, I mean, I thought this was a really good conversation, and I'm like fascinated by this. The thing that strikes me, I agree with both of these comments and also with John's comment. I thought Greg's point around alienated subjectivity is particularly interesting to me. I mean, we're living through a populist moment, but there's been populist moments throughout all of history, right, where the sort of underside has reacted, right, and has tried to reclaim their sovereignty. I mean, I think you can read, you know, the longer cycle of decline as, you know, ending with sort of, you know, totalitarianism in the 20th century, or you can read the longer cycle of decline anywhere else in, you know, the history of the world, right?
Yeah.
But I think there is something unique about the breakdown of sort of neoliberal post-politics where people have finally been able to say, enough of this shit, like.
Literally anything else.
Anything.
But at the end of the day, I think Greg's point was particularly good, and the media piece I think is particularly good because those who feel as if they've been reclaiming their voice, the voice of the people, have been manipulated to trade really one cover story, one myth for another. And so that's the unique piece for me, but I think, yeah, that's a really good conversation.
I think the summary is that people want alternative truth. It doesn't matter how untrue it is.
I think that's a good place. That's a good place to leave it.
Okay. Thank you.